In today's video, I'm going to be looking at energy issues in terms of demand, supply, security and efficiency. This is an introduction to the idea that demand and production varies globally for energy and is affected by different factors. This is for the IGCSE Geography spec for economic activity. So we've seen a global increase in the amount of energy that we demand, and this is because of two main factors. The fact is that world population has increased over the last 100 years. If we have more people are going to use more energy. Also in those last 100 years, we've seen living standards increase. So that means that people are wealthier and have more disposable income. And when they have more disposable income, they often spend those on goods and services that are energy intensive. Here in the example, someone's bought a car, washing machine, some electronic devices. These are all things that use lots more energy. So we see an increase in global energy, but obviously this isn't spatially even. So we see wealthier countries often consume the most energy. This is because lot of people have lots more disposable income and therefore are buying more products that need energy. North America, Europe, Australasia and Oceania being very energy intensive places, where in sub-Saharan Africa less wealthy countries and therefore less energy demand. Here's another map that shows you the world production of energy. So this is done in million tons of oil equivalent, and we can see that places like China, United States, Russia, India, these are all places that are producing a lot of energy, Saudi Arabia. This is largely to do with the fact that these countries have large natural supplies of resources like coal and oil and gas, and therefore produce that energy. It sometimes happens that some of those countries, like the USA, are producing a lot of energy because they're consuming a lot of energy. And same with China, it's got a large secondary industry, and so it's producing a lot of energy because it has lots of resources, but also because it needs to fuel that very energy intensive sector. I'm now going to talk about once global demand goes up, we have a certain amount of finite supply on Earth at the moment, and if demand outshoots supply, then we get something that we could happen in the future where we get an energy gap. So as demand is increasing globally, if that energy demand outstrips the supply, we could have an energy gap in the future. And we're going to talk about ways that we can overcome that energy gap. One of the issues, as with climate change that's occurring, we're trying to replace those really reliable fossil fuels that are running out with less reliable non-renewables. And because that means the supply isn't as consistent and regular as it was with fossil fuels, that means that the supply is going down while the demand increases, which makes that gap even harder to close. So we've got lots of complex issues happening here that can create this energy gap, and it's not necessarily just because demand is out of control. Another issue I'd like to talk about is energy security. So one of those things, as demand globally goes up, each nation and each country has to make sure that they have enough energy to meet the demands of their people. So this can happen quite simply by a country like the UK producing energy within its borders from the resources it's got. So the UK is investing a lot in nuclear, but also in things like wind energy. However, if it can't meet them, it can import energy supplies from abroad. So a key idea is to know this idea of energy security. This is where a country has enough energy to meet the demands of its country, and we would say that when they do that, you're energy secure, you've got high energy security, and if you don't do that, you're very energy insecure. So the kind of countries are now trying to be able to see if they can do most of their energy from within their own borders, and I'll explain in a second why that's an issue. The UK used to be one of those countries that actually exported more energy sources than it imported. So in the 80s, it was drilling a lot of oil and gas from the North Sea, and then that was able to export it to other countries who could use it. But as you can see now, we are relying much more on imports from other countries to meet our demand. So lots of the crude oil and natural gas we get from a pipeline from Norway, which means we're a net importer of energy. We are not self-reliant in the UK for our own energy needs. but we've got a very good consistent supply from Norway, which means that we are able to meet our needs. And so if I look on this map, we can see in terms of risk, the UK is quite a low risk. And that is because we are able to get really consistent supplies from places like Norway and produce enough energy in our country. However, there are some countries that are less secure, as they either don't have the resources or can't get adequate supplies consistently. So if I look in Eastern Europe, I can see the fact is Ukraine is very high risk, and the major issue for Ukraine is that it's relying on Russia to produce a lot of the oil and gas to supply its energy needs, which means that places that do have lots of resources, so countries that have these huge energy surpluses, places like Saudi Arabia, but also the USA and Russia, and if they're very secure in their energy supplies, they can use this position for political and economic gain. That essentially they can use it to hold other countries to ransom if they want. And there's a headline here about the fact that Russia could at any point decide to shut off the gas to the EU, which would put a lot of the EU economies in trouble. One of the ways that we can reduce the demand in a country, but also globally, and to help us improve energy security, is to be more energy efficient. Energy efficiency basically means using less energy to perform the same tasks. An example I've used here is to use an LED light rather than a normal light bulb, because it's doing the same task, but it just loses a lot more less energy to do the same thing. So there are a couple of reasons why being energy efficient is good, and why we need to be more energy efficient as the world goes on. The obvious one I've just stated is that we want countries to be more energy secure, so they don't have to rely on other countries holding them to ransom for their energy supplies. We also realise that there's a finite amount of resources on Earth. Lots of the non-renewable supplies, if we are more efficient with them and use them over a slower period of time, then we can have a longer period of using those resources. Similarly, we are more aware of the environmental problems, and so carrying on the current rate of using our energy supplies would be bad, and so using less energy will actually help us to maybe stop the climate disaster that's coming down the road. So that's a quick overview of the demand, supply, efficiency and security for the IGCSE geography specification.